The recent return of Galnet is picking up threads of storylines which at this point are a few years old. With that in mind, I thought it would be a good time to take a look back at the history of some of the current events. Hopefully then this should be especially useful to you newer players and of some interest to the older players. In short, this is a look at the lore from the past few years in an attempt to bring everyone up to date on the relevant plot lines. The two story threads in question then surround the rulers of both the Federation as well as the Empire. On the Federation side we have the ex-president Jasmina Halsey, and on the Empire side is the Imperial royal family of the Duvals. So let's start with Jasmina Halsey. Way back in 2014, that is the in-game year of 3300, the president of the Federation at the time was Jasmina Halsey. Unfortunately for her, she ruled for a fairly short time. Taking up office in 3300, her rule ended in June 3301 due to a vote of no confidence, but I'm actually getting a little ahead of myself here. Halsey's rule may have been short, but it was also a controversial one. In 3301, just a few months into her presidency, her vice president died under somewhat suspicious circumstances, and this after a period of ill-thought-out tax increases and other missteps from the administration. At the time, Zachary Hudson, the current president of the Federation, was the then shadow president, and he made a lot of political posturing against Halsey. The most interesting thing about Halsey occurred in May 3301, when she mysteriously went missing along with her ship Starship One, which was suspected at that particular time of having been destroyed. Secretary of State Felicia Winters was then sworn in as the acting president. Now, things weren't that easy for Felicia Winters. The rule of ruling in absence of the previous president did cause some difficulty for her, and of course the shadow president, Zachary Hudson, didn't make things easy at all, keep pointing out all the flaws in her current decisions and all the rest of that. Eventually, in the absence of Halsey, she was actually removed from office due to a vote of no confidence in her administration. Following this, Zachary Hudson was voted in by his landslide vote as the new president of the Federation. A different party got in there then. And just for a bit of perhaps interesting political information on the backstory there, Zachary Hudson's party is the Republicans, whilst Jennifer Halsey's or Felicia Winters' party are the Liberals. Now, Zachary Hudson still holds office today of the Federation. That's in 3306, 5 years after being voted in. Whilst most of these stories didn't actually have any in-game events surrounding them, at least up until this point, they did add a bunch of backstory to the game world, bringing it very much alive. Then, in 2016, there was indeed an in-game event in the form of a community goal called the Search for Starship One. This was initiated by Zachary Hudson, who wanted the community to go and help find any information perhaps for the whereabouts of Starship One. Miraculously, the wreckage of Starship One was indeed found. It was destroyed, and escape pods were also found, one with Jasmina Halsey being among them. Unfortunately, she wasn't particularly well at that time and had to remain in an induced coma, but she was revived some weeks later. Now, at this point, it was often commented on that Halsey, after being revived, was a changed person. Her attitude was markedly different, and perhaps most interestingly, she continuously referred to super intelligent beings which she encountered during her lost time. Of these beings, she said, "They are out there. I have seen them. We must put aside our petty differences and work together to establish contact. There is so much we could learn from them." Further, she believed them to be the true architects of creation. An exploration-based community goal was later launched to assist with locating these so-called beings. Now, naturally, Halsey's claims were met with disbelief. In fact, she even committed herself to a psychiatric centre for a while, I guess just to prove she either was or wasn't crazy, but I think she started to doubt herself based on the lore at some particular point. But 6 months later, the first Guardian ruins were discovered, and many people feel that the Guardians were perhaps the race of super-intelligent beings that Halsey was talking about. Now, these discoveries could have vindicated Halsey somewhat, but she never really discussed it too much for some reason. And eventually, she kind of faded away into obscurity, rarely being mentioned on Galnet. Finally, she relocated to Alliance space to become an advisor to the Alliance Prime Minister, Edward Mahon. Now, behind all of these story plot points, there remained one unsolved mystery. Why did Starship One explode? The return of Galnet this month has kind of answered this, confirming that it was indeed what many people suspected, sabotage. But the motivations behind all this still remain unknown. On the 18th of September, Chief Technician Rory Webster, a department head of engineering for Starship One, was arrested for making unauthorized adjustments to the ship's hyperdrive. And that pretty much brings us up to date. It does seem as though this is going to unfold into something a bit more, and who knows, maybe either Felicia Winters or even Zachary Hudson were involved in all of this. That would be a pretty dramatic unfolding of the events, wouldn't it? Now, the other plot point, the other story point coming on along at the moment is to do with the Empire and the Duvals. The Duvals have a long and storied history in the Elite universe, which goes back to before the early days of the Empire itself. This is a bit too much to get into in this particular video, so instead what we're going to do is just focus on more recent events, that is, the events that began with the launch of Elite Dangerous in 2014. And incidentally, this is all relevant to current events for a number of reasons. Firstly, because Empire Space has very recently came under attack, with numerous space stations being targeted by terrorists. And secondly, because Harold Duval of the Imperial royal family has recently been assassinated. Now in 2014, which of course was the in-game year of 3300, the ruler of the Empire was Emperor Hengst Duval. During his rule, he made a number of changes to Imperial law, some of them quite controversial, and most notably changing the law to allow females to ascend to the throne, something that would later be very significant. The Emperor was in a poor state of health through his later stages of life, and certainly by the time the game began. Most of his duties were carried out by Chancellor Blaine. During this time, the Emperor also decreed that his son, Harold Duval, was not of sound mind and therefore not fit to rule. Now, keep in mind that during this time, Hengst Duval was definitely not well. He wasn't in the public eye very much, and some believed he was also of weak mind and potentially easily manipulated, something that could be relevant to what came next. So essentially, Hengst Duval decreed that the throne would not pass to his son Harold. Following this, the Emperor supported the claim that Arissa Lavinge was actually his illegitimate daughter. Shortly after this, he announced his intent to marry Arissa's mother, Florence Lavinge. Arissa, perhaps anticipating future events, changed her name to Arissa Lavinge Duval, claiming the family name of the Imperial royal family itself. In August of 3301, on his wedding day, the Emperor was assassinated by Empress Dawn, and a few months later, Arissa was elected by Senate vote, as the new Emperor. And not really a surprise there, as the title of Emperor has always fallen to the Duval family, and this is something that the extremist group NMLA actually want to change. And it's perhaps one of the reasons they assassinated Harold Duval, and almost certainly the reason they attacked the space stations in Empire Space, and they do seem to be closing in on Achenar as well. So essentially, through the use of violence, they want to change the rule of Empire, of one where the Empire gets the title through hereditary means, to one where it's elected in by a vote of the people itself. That's not too different to the way the Federation works then. Now, Arissa Duval has been Emperor for much of the time Elite Dangerous has been around. She lives on the Empire capital in Achenar, and as we say, Empire Space has recently been under threat by the extremist organisation, so it also likely means there is a direct threat to the Emperor. Now, it seems that there will be further events unfolding around all this, as the Empire are very much a focus for some heated activity. Quite interesting to see where all this goes. That then brings us to the end of this video. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys and girls next time.